Hey, how are you? It is the On Friar podcast with you on a Thursday evening. No Derek today. So we've got instead one of our favorite guests, Kyle Glaser, with us again, and much to discuss with Kyle as the off-season wheels are very much churning. And there is one pitcher in particular that seems like everybody's talking about. Like all the conversation around baseball seems to be around this one guy. And so we'll talk about him, maybe some Arizona Fall League stuff, maybe some of the big, not maybe, definitely some of the big questions facing the Padres this offseason. Always appreciate Kyle's very valuable insight. And so excited to get into some of these topics, especially Roki Sasaki, because that's one we haven't really discussed much on this platform. And Kyle's written about him or a lot. And so excited to kind of get his insight and his information about a guy that there's a lot of excitement about around baseball, certainly in San Diego, and the potential that he could possibly join the Padres, but obviously will be a competitive market in a sense, in that there's a lot of people, even if there's not necessarily a ton of money with this particular instance. So we'll get into all of that. Thanks to OGs, the sponsor of the On Friar podcast. Appreciate all they do for us. If there's a big game you want to catch, OG is a great place to do it. A bunch of locations around San Diego County, whether it's the NBA, maybe NHL, college football Sundays, NFL on college football Saturdays, NFL on Sundays. OG is a great place to do it. Awesome menu, wonderful beer list, and thanks to OGs for all they do for On Friar and the NBC7 sports team. Without further ado, the walk-up music. It is the On Fire podcast. I am Darnay Tripp. He is Kyle Glaser. Always a pleasure to be with you, Kyle, and appreciate you doing it on short notice today. Derek texted me this morning, said, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it in today. I said, all right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to text Kyle and see if Kyle will hop on with us. And you were kind enough, generous enough with your time to do so. So thank you very much. And I must say I know you're off and on with John and Jim. I was on with John and Jim, was texting those guys. I was like, I know, we were joking around like friend of the podcast and all that. I'm like, who is like your top 5 friends of the show, I should say, for John and Jim? And they're like, you're on the list, but you're below Kyle Glaser. I was like, I get it. I understand. So there you go.
You're too kind. Always happy to jump on with you, Darnay. Always fun to talk Padres and just baseball at large.
Yeah, how is this all season treating you so far? I know in a different role than you've been in the past, but still obviously very much active and in the know. How are you spending your time these days?
Yeah, just continuing to track what's going on with Roki Sasaki along with everyone else. This is the first off season that I haven't been at Baseball America since the 2015-16 off season, which means it's the first year I don't have to do a prospect handbook since 2015. And I have to say it is much more relaxing not having to do that. And again, I was, co-author and editor for 8 of them, and it was always a very rewarding process, but it was an absolute bear. A lot of high stress, tons of information, tons to do. So for the first time in about a decade, I feel like I actually have an off season as a baseball writer. It's kind of nice.
And I know this because in past off seasons when I've hit you up, it's your appearances have basically fallen in line with where you are in putting together the prospect handbook. We're really busy right now. It's going to be done in this time. We got a little window here, and so I know how much of a worthwhile time suck, but a time suck that was.
Yeah, again, extremely rewarding, but having done 8 of them, it's nice to not have to do it again.
I know, you mentioned Roki, and we'll get to him because you've written about him a bunch. But with the season ending, in the last month or so, I think we spoke maybe early on in the postseason Obviously, a little bit's happened since then. Mike Schilt getting the extension. Just like, when we have folks like you on, I like to get kind of the 30,000-foot view because we're here in the weeds and we tend to see things kind of from that perspective. From yours, what do you make of this season that was 2024, and just some of these early decisions, like with Mike Schilt and all that. Now looking forward to the next year and just building on some of the promising developments that we saw.
Look, 2024 is a smashing success. I know obviously there's a lot of frustration about losing to the Dodgers and the NLDS, especially being up 2-1 and being at home in game 4, which is totally valid. But take a step back. This was the second most wins in the regular season any Padres team has ever had in the franchise's history. The only other team to win more games than this year's team was 1998 when they reached the World Series. This was a team that coming into this year, let's not forget, I mean, people's heads and jobs were on the line. I mean, this was coming off of another disappointing season. And you looked at this team and said, I just don't know. And I think coming in, if I were to tell you that Fernando Tatis, Yu Darvish, Joe Musgrove would all get hurt and miss a big chunk of the season, Xander Bogaerts would get hurt again and be ineffective for half the year, Ha-seong Kim would take a step back, and some of their big bullpen offseason things like Yuki Matsui wouldn't turn into the high leverage relievers hoped for, you would have thought, oh, okay, the team's in 4th place. I mean, that's a lot of things that went wrong for them, especially in the first half. And the fact that they were able to stay above water, get everyone back healthy, and go on the run they did in the second half and have the best record in baseball after the All-Star break, won a playoff series against a good Braves team. This was a very, very successful season. And look, the way things went down with the Dodgers, again, I understand it's frustrating, but when the Padres were the team that gave the Dodgers the biggest run for their money, more than the Mets, more than the Yankees, that says a lot about the quality of this team. So again, I understand the frustration with how things ended, but I think this entire season was a smashing success all the way around. And the Padres have to look at this. This is one of the top 5 seasons in franchise history easily.
Yeah, and it's funny how much the postseason kind of colors your outlook on a season. And, just like weighing it against 2022, and 2022 wasn't that great of a regular season, but obviously you get to the NLCS, you beat the Dodgers. 2024, I mean, just the way the franchise kind of took a major step forward in a number of different avenues, but then you can't control the ultimate outcome, and you have a missed opportunity against the Dodgers, and it's you have that kind of nagging at you, that like bit of unfulfillment that you didn't have necessarily in 2022. But that's the life of a sports fan, right? And I've also thought like it was also just like a very normal playoff loss to a degree, and sometimes like when you want to be one of those teams that like you're in the postseason every single year. Some years you do great, and some like look at the Phillies. You know what I mean? Like the Phillies got to a World Series this year, best team in baseball early on, very disappointing end result. But when you're there year in and year out, it's easier to kind of just live with those. And this wasn't like a massive disappointment. They didn't lose in 2 games to the Braves. It wasn't the level of success that we saw in 2022.
Yeah.
Uh, but the hope is, and I know the hope for Schilt and Preller is that like we're a team that's going to be there every single year and give ourselves the opportunity again. I think from a Padres standpoint and a fan standpoint, that is kind of a foreign concept because they have back those playoff appearances. So when you have a tough result, it's harder to just like shake it off and be like, all right, we're going to be back there next year.
And look, this year's Padres team was the team that was built more than any of their predecessors to reach the World Series. You look at the strength of the rotation, having 4 starters until Musgrove got hurt, the strength of the bullpen, that lineup with guys that could hurt you 1-9, contact, power, speed, a whole bunch of different ways. This was a really, really good team. And that was reflected in the fact that they won 93 games. They beat the eventual World Series champion during the regular season in terms of head-to-head matchups. And they were the team, again, more than anyone else, more than the Mets, more than the Yankees, who gave the eventual World Series champion, the biggest run for their money. Again, I understand it's frustrating and especially going scoreless over the final 24 innings of the NLDS, but I give a lot of credit to the Dodgers and their pitching staff. They just executed great stuff, great location, great sequencing to a man. And we saw that pitching staff do good work against the Yankees and Mets too. It wasn't like it was just the Padres who fell apart. So again, you're right. The postseason is always going to color the regular season. I do think that when you're a team like, the Braves in the 90s, where they made it every single year and only won one World Series and kept flaming out, it's understandable why it's frustrating. I just look at this Padres season, and I think if you take everything together, think about where they were when they started, everything that happened during the regular season. Like I said, if I told you all those events occurred before the year started, you would have assumed they finished in fourth place. Instead,
Yeah.
they were one of the best teams in baseball. It's a testament to Mike Shilton and his coaching staff, testament to the players, testament to the front office, pushing the right buttons, acquiring the right players at the right times. This was a very, very successful year and one of the best years in franchise history. And, a cold streak against the eventual World Series champion that had the best record in baseball the entire regular season shouldn't take away from that.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's get to Roki Sasaki. Let's get to the guy that's on everybody's minds right now. You've written about the guy, the guy, or just kind of in terms of like his scouting report, what the process looks like, all the important elements of this situation. We've heard different things. We've heard that very likely it's the Dodgers. Then Jim Bowden, I think, wrote today, like, very likely it's not the Dodgers. If you had to handicap it right now, shot in the dark, what does your gut tell you about the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes?
That no one really knows anything. Because it's funny you mentioned that, because I've been speaking with general managers, pro scouting directors, high-level evaluators, agents, a lot of people who are in positions to know things and have a track record of being right. And even they are all over the map in what they're saying. I spoke to one official who probably has, one of the best track records of all the officials in the game I speak to of being right, who told me it's the Dodgers and the Padres neck and neck. It's those two and everyone else is way behind. And then I spoke to someone else who also has a track record of being right and is in a position to know things, who said, oh, no, that's not the case at all. I don't think what I'm hearing is he doesn't want the Dodgers. He doesn't want a big market, with tons of media attention. He wants something more small to mid. So two people who are very, very credible, have great track records of being right, and are positions to know things, are saying the exact opposite is the case. And I think it's just illustrative that, look, Roki Sasaki still has not been officially posted. And the truth is, no, he hasn't said what he prefers. His agent hasn't said what he prefers, even to team officials yet. So I think a lot of people right now, they want to know answers, but the answers don't exist yet. People are not very good at being patient, especially in the Twitter-fueled, 24/7 news cycle. But we're just going to have to wait to find out, because again, even the people who know things don't actually know anything right now. I'm getting so much conflicting information. It's reflective of the reality of the situation.
You're making me think of Tyrion Lannister. I drink and I know things, which is probably what some of these baseball people are doing during the off season. Now the timeline of it is such that we don't necessarily want him to be posted anytime soon, right? Like the later the better, for Padres purposes, because their international pool is, dwindled for 2024, re-upped for 2025, and they're not at the top of the list, but they're ahead of the Dodgers, and they've got a competitive figure. If Sasaki is interested in San Diego, should be enough to fetch him. I do appreciate that money is less of a factor with this, and maybe it's just coming off of like Shohei Ohtani and Juan Soto and all these guys, where fit is obviously important, but how much a team can throw at them ends up being kind of the determining factor.
Yes.
It just feels pure and nice that it's kind of a level playing field, and he's going to get his 5 to 7 million and a bunch of endorsements, and then get a chance to, play through his initial, contract, and then rake in a potentially a huge figure down the line. So I appreciate that aspect of this, but like, what can you tell us just about like the timeline and that element of it, just in terms of how that impacts like whether it be the decision making, the timing of like when he posts and how it plays out for teams like the Padres.
Yeah, so from the time he's officially posted, teams have a 45-day negotiating window. So what's going to make the most sense for him is to officially be posted at a point when that 45-day negotiating window, at least a good chunk of it, falls after January 15th, 2025. January 15th, 2025 is when the opening of the 2025 international signing period gets underway. And so as long as a significant chunk of his posting window is in that time frame, he can get more money. As you mentioned, right now, the way the international bonus pools are set up, every team has more or less between $5.5 and $7.5 million in their international bonus pool, more like 5.1 to 7.5, if you want to be exact. And teams can spend up to that amount. Plus, you can acquire international bonus slots, basically international bonus dollars through trades with other teams. And you're allowed to acquire up to 60% of your international bonus pool. So for the teams that are at the $7.5 million bonus pool level, they can acquire an additional 60%. That's about $12 million. That would be the bonus they could give to Roki Sasaki at the absolute max. The Padres bonus pool for 2025 is $6,261,600. 60% on top of that would be just over 10 million. So 10 million is the absolute max the Padres could give him. So the absolute max he could get is in that 10 to 12 million dollar range. And for 10 to 12 million dollars, you're potentially getting someone who right away would be one of the top 15, 20 pitchers in baseball if he stays healthy, and long-term has a chance to be top 5 and maybe even the single best pitcher in baseball if he stays healthy. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this plays out. And I mentioned that 10 to $12 million figure. That's if teams can acquire the full 60% in trades. Most teams aren't going to be able to do that. A lot of teams already have dollars committed to other international prospects. I'm not going to want to break those deals. So 10 to 12 million is the absolute max he's going to get. And it's very, very likely he ends up signing for below that.
It's very interesting. I'm just curious to see like how many, like what the suitors end up looking like, because you hear about so few, but it's like, why, like everybody
all 30 will be in.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
like
all 30 at his price point, all 30 will be in. Now, generally speaking, the reason you see some teams highlighted more than others is some teams scout Japan, put more resources into Japan, put more money into establishing relationships in Japan than others. Generally speaking, the Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, and Cubs are the teams that pour the most resources into scouting Asia and have for some time. You also have the Padres, Mariners, Giants, Rangers. Those are other clubs that pour a lot of resources into scouting Asia. You know, teams like the Braves and Phillies, for example, are great organizations that have, you know, a lot of success, but they don't put a lot of time, money, or effort into scouting Asia. And when you're talking about this being more or less a recruiting pitch, relationships matter. You know, one of the things that people forget about Shohei Ohtani is once it became clear he was going to go to an American League team because they could offer him the ability to DH and pitch, a big reason why he went to the Angels is he'd known Billy Epler for 5+ years. There was an existing relationship there. And at the end of the day, you think about college football recruiting, relationships are a big part of it. So it's the same deal here. And that's why you see a lot of those teams listed, is because those are the teams that have scouted him for years. They've known him for years. He's known them for years. And the perception is relationships will give you an edge whenever you are really limited to a recruiting pitch. You can't just throw a bunch of money at someone.
Yeah. I mean, if I were the Rose, it'd be like, hey, Roki, you ever been to Kansas City? I don't know what their pool is like, but again, it's one of the interesting aspects of these situations with him being under 25, 23 years old. When is his birthday? I know
he just turned 23.
Just turned 23.
It's here in the fall. I don't know the exact date, but he
Yeah.
just turned 23.
So you know, it makes it interesting because it is not just like the straight up bidding war like we saw with Yoshinobu Yamamoto. You know, guys that are beyond that age range,
Right.
which I think I make, you know, it makes it fun, makes it interesting, whether or not like I think the idea of there being some some random, like the Reds suddenly being like a real player for Roki Sasaki. Like, obviously be great if he ends up with the Padres, but it's, what makes kind of these types of situations interesting. Does the picture of Roki Sasaki wearing a Padres t-shirt tell us anything, Kyle Glaser?
I'm always hesitant to read into things. I'll say this. There's no question in my mind that the Padres will be in the mix, both in terms of how much they value, players in Asia, how much they scout players in Asia, the relationships, the time, the money, the energy, the resources they spend to invest in building those relationships. That all matters. And, we saw back in 2017, that offseason, AJ Preller learned Japanese to make his pitch to Shohei Ohtani. I mean, there's a lot of devotion in there. So there's no question in my mind the Padres will absolutely be in the mix. Again, it's going to come down to, what does he truly want? And only he knows that, and maybe his agent knows that. Again, there's a lot of rumors going around about what he does and doesn't want, how much, a lot of it's just speculation at this point. So I think that you should go into this as a Padres fan expecting to be in the race. No question about it. Does that mean they win out? That's going to depend on how comfortable he feels in San Diego when he comes to visit, what he hears when he talks to the players, what he hears when AJ Preller and his lieutenants are in there making their pitch to him. Again, it's not like this has been decided already. It's still TBD, and a lot of it's just going to come down to what happens in those meetings and who impresses him the most.
Do you expect, do we generally hear much from the player, from his representation, before they sign, other than just kind of like reports and sourced information? Like, we're gonna do like a Scott Boras type scrum with his rep or anything like that, or is it usually, like, I'm trying to think in the past with like a guy like Kodai Senga and others that the Padres have kind of been, presumably in the mix for. This seems to be kind of on a different level. Do you think we'll get any sort of inclination, or is it going to be just kind of these sourced reports, and then one day, there's a passing bomb that he's signing with the San Diego Padres?
Generally speaking, Japanese culture is not one of, boldly and brashly stating what you're going to do, where you're going to go, what you want. Generally speaking, Japanese players, when they sign, it's very reserved, and you find out at the last minute. Let's not forget, even Shohei Ohtani broke the news himself by announcing on his Instagram he was going to the Dodgers. No leaks, no reporters.
Just with the Dodgers logo, right? Like, it wasn't even like one of these edits that we see when a kid commits to a college football program or something like that. It was just like a Dodgers logo.
Right. So, Joel Wolf, I remember being at the winter meetings a few years ago when Kodai Senga was a free agent, and I just happened to be walking by. I saw a crowd of Japanese reporters, and it's Joel Wolf from Wasserman, who was Kodai Senga's agent. It is also Roki Sasaki's agent. He was just standing and talking. It wasn't a Scott Boras type scrum. Almost no one knew he was there. I didn't even know it. I just happened to be walking by, right place, right time. And, the most information he gave at that time was that Kodai Senga had 5-year deals from, 5 or 6 teams. And that was it. He didn't list who those teams were. He didn't talk about money. He just said, yep, here's what we have, and we'll go from there. So I would not expect there to be much in the way of leaks throughout this process. And I think, again, just talking to people who know things and have track records of being right, even they are saying very, very conflicting things. And I think, I would take anything and everything you hear about what Roki Sasaki wants with a grain of salt right now, considering he has not even been posted yet. If we start hearing it after he starts meeting with teams and officials really start to speak to him and his representatives and get to know what his priorities are, that's different. But right now, the truth is no one knows anything, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying.
Yeah, and then there's you talk about relationships and that sort of thing. People bring up Yu Darvish all the time, and him, being kind of a mentor and obviously an important figure in Japan and for younger pitchers like himself. So you'd figure that would be the draw. There's also the situation with Kodai Senga where, Yu Darvish seemed to be very honest with him about Chicago and his experience there and how much he enjoyed it. And I don't know if it's one of those cultural things where, Darvish doesn't necessarily, I'm sure he would give him a pitch for the Padres, but, he also might tell him like, hey, that team X would be a good situation for you here. Team Y, you know what I mean? So there's that element of it as well, where you have a guy that's a draw, but a guy that, if you Darvish going to badmouth another organization and say, hey, the Padres are the only place you can go, like you got to come, like we often I think expect, or maybe like think our athletes will do, but these conversations are more nuanced, and Darvish is an adult. He's a grown-up, mature guy, and he also knows what it's like to be in that situation and wants him to thrive. And he's probably going to give him like the most honest, answer in terms of like where a good place for him would be, along with, I wouldn't say instead of San Diego, but along with San Diego.
Yeah, but I want to go back to what I said when I said if people are lying. That was a strong word. What I should say is a lot of rumors and whispers and speculation at times are being treated as fact. So I think what I want to amend my statement, not people intentionally lying as much as there's just a lot of, smoke out there, and sifting through what's real and what isn't is difficult. So just want to amend that statement real quick. But going back to you, Darvish, you're right. And I think it's something that a lot of fans misunderstand, is they expect because a player plays for a certain team, he's going to automatically bang the table for free agents to come to that team. And that certainly happens. That certainly is the case. But a lot of times, the players know each other on, closer, more intimate levels. And, once they hear what their priorities are, they'll give them the pluses and minuses. Every team, every city has its pluses and minuses. And when you think about you, Darvish, he's played for the Los Angeles Dodgers, Texas Rangers, Chicago Cubs, and San Diego Padres, 4 teams that are very, very active in scouting Asia. He has experience playing with all of them and dealing with all of them and living in all those cities. And he's someone who's going to be able to give Roki Sasaki, the full gamut of information on what it's like to be in each place. So again, whether or not, you Darvish is actively going to be like, come to San Diego, this is the only place for you. Is it possible? Sure. I would say that generally speaking, players give more measured responses because they understand there's pluses and minuses, and every individual is different and what they're looking for and will they'll flourish the most. So I think it's more about, anyone in any free agency, recruiting type of situation. More often than not, it's going to be more balanced and measured assessments as opposed to only come here, this is the only place for you.
And famously, AJ Preller name dropped Roki Sasaki at Peter Seidler's memorial earlier this year, which is also interesting. I think caught people by surprise, but then gives you some idea of kind of the history there, that he would feel comfortable doing that. That's a name that they've obviously discussed, and Preller presumably feels like, as you mentioned, the Padres are going to have a shot at this guy. We've talked about him for a while without actually really like talking about him. Why is he this can't miss, crazy potential, future big league star? I mean, we've talked about these guys before, and there's always like, well, if maybe blah blah blah. This seems to be a different case. Like, this guy's going to be a stud
as long as he stays healthy. That's always the caveat with pitchers. But yes, from a talent perspective, this is one of the most talented pitchers in the world, Major League Baseball, NPB, anywhere. He's 6'4", 200 pounds, athletic as heck, when he's fully right, sits 97 to 100 with life on his fastball, throws an absolutely ridiculous splitter that comes out of the same slot. So hitters can't figure out whether it's his fastball or it's his splitter until it's too late. I mean, that thing just gets some ridiculous swings and misses. And oh, by the way, he's got a nasty slider too. He's one of those pitchers, when you watch him, you're just going, your eyebrows go up like, whoa. Or in some cases, you're muttering under your breath like, Jesus, what the? Like, just absolutely ridiculous stuff. That's why there's so much excitement about him. Throws plenty of strikes. There's, like a lot of young pitchers, there's times his command and his control can be inconsistent, has some, some days where it just doesn't have it. So, just sharpening that up a little bit. The main thing with him is just health. He only made 18 starts last year due to lingering arm fatigue and arm soreness. And the year before, he only made 15 starts due to a torn left oblique muscle. During his high school days, he at the Koshien tournament, He threw over 500 pitches in an 8-day span at one point. He had a 12-inning, 21 strikeout, 194 pitch complete game as a high schooler, throwing upper 90s. In Japan, there's not as much care for young arms. There's a lot more, hey, just go out and throw. So there is a little bit of concern with just how much velocity has been on his arm from a very young age that, maybe there could be some health concerns there long term. At the same time, given the stuff, given the athleticism, given the physicality and the success he's had, he holds the NPB single game strikeout record. He threw a perfect game with 19 strikeouts. You think about how many amazing pitchers have come over from Japan. Hideo Nomo, Yu Darvish, Daisuke Matsuzaka, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Masahiro Tanaka, and so many more. None of them have ever done what he did in that single game. You saw that talent just come together, and it was amazing. And oh, by the way, he threw 8 perfect innings his next start too. He went, and it's just an insane number of 51 consecutive batters without allowing a base runner. It was insane. So
Wow.
The talent level is truly incredible. And the best part is there's still a sense he can get better in that, he still has some room to add some muscle. There's still room for that command and control to improve a little bit. And just like we saw with Shohei Ohtani when he came out, speaking about Ohtani solely as a pitcher, the scouting report was actually pretty similar. Big, long, lean, great fastball splitter, solid third pitch slider. And we've seen Ohtani come over, get bigger, get stronger, improve his command and control, and add some pitches to his mix. He was the same age when he was posted as Sasaki. He is going to be at 23. So there's a sense that Sasaki can get better in the same vein that Ohtani did, speaking solely as a pitcher. And considering how good he is already, it's a pretty enticing possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And even with like the velo dipping, I mean, it's still like these aren't bad numbers that he's putting up.
Right. So he had a drop last year, related a little bit to that lingering arm fatigue, arm soreness. The velocity was down, a couple ticks on the fastball and the slider, but he still had a low 2 ERA and was striking out 10 per 9 against, the best hitters in the world outside of Major League Baseball. NPB, Nippon Professional Baseball, is the best baseball in the world outside of MLB. And so even when he's, quote unquote down, he's still one of the best pitchers in the league. His talent level is truly extraordinary. Again, it just comes down to health, like all young pitchers.
And you wrote a piece in Baseball America, I think it was last spring, and you had an interesting comp just in terms of like the hype and the promise. And you mentioned Steven Strasburg, who obviously coming out of San Diego State was this no-brainer, can't miss. Whoever has the number 1 pick is going to take this guy, and he'll be up there soon. And had some health issues, but obviously like blew the doors off early on. World Series winner, had a really, really good career. That's like, there's been a few guys, but that's one that jumps out like recent history. Like this guy's on a different level. And so to be compared to him just in terms of that potential and trajectory, I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I wrote that in March during the World Baseball Classic, and I put it to a few evaluators, and they all mentioned like this is the best pitching prospect since Steven Strasburg. I will say after that, Paul Skeens went absolutely off in the spring, April, May, June. And that conversation became, okay, this is the best guy I've seen. This is in that Garrett Cole, Steven Strasburg bucket. So, Paul Skeens did also earn that comp. It just the timing of that article, Skeens took off about a month later. But yes, I mean, you are talking about someone who is seen as I would say generational pitching prospect, although we just had one of those in Paul Skeens. So I don't know if you can call him generational when there's 2 back-to-back years, which is a testament to how much talent there is across the world right now. But yeah, I mean, he is a true, oh my God type of player when you see him. I mean, that's really the reaction you have. I remember the first time I pulled up some video, and I've seen a lot of baseball at all levels. And even I was like, oh, whoa, or, oh my goodness, like, this is just special. It's rare and it's special. And like anyone else, you just hope he stays healthy. And that's sort of always the caveat, right? You think about the guys who have been named as these greatest pitching prospects of all time. Steven Strasburg didn't throw a meaningful pitch after the age of 30. Mark Pryor, was done after 25. I mean, pitchers are just so fickle, and we know how many great talented pitchers have had their career sidetracked by injuries. So that's always the caveat. But that all being said, you take a chance on this talent every time, and especially when you're talking about the absolute max you're going to pay is a 10 to 12 million dollar signing bonus, and very likely under that. Yeah, you don't think twice about it.
Assuming health is not an issue, you would be surprised if Roki Sasaki pitched more than blank innings in 2025.
Yeah, so we've seen recently when Japanese pitchers first started coming over, they were expected to move on to the, 5-man rotation, 4 days of rest. Because in Japan, pitchers only pitch once per week. So coming over to the US, that was always the big adjustment, getting into a 5-man rotation, pitching, once every 5 days as opposed to once a week. Recently, we have seen teams adapt the other way and start giving some of their Japanese signees an extra day of rest so that they are essentially pitching once a week or on a 6-man rotation more or less. We saw the Mets do that with Kodai Senga. We saw the Cubs do that with Shota Imanaga. Even the Dodgers, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, even before he got hurt, he didn't pitch on regular rest the entire season. He always had an extra day. So I think given his injury history, given how we've seen teams do this, he threw 111 innings last year. Generally, you don't see teams add more than 30 or 40 innings a year to a workload. He's been higher than that in the past, but I would expect somewhere in that 140, 150 range. Again, some of it's going to depend on how he feels and how he adjusts and how he adapts, but I think that would be a safe assumption.
I think I mentioned Kodai Senga as a Cub earlier. I meant Seiya Suzuki talking about the Darvish dynamic there. Yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah, I'm fascinated by this and how this all plays out. I just love that it's a kind of a as even a playing field as you generally see with this sort of thing, and yeah, there's been excitement around the Padres for this guy for over a year now, and man, it would be demoralizing if he ended up with the Dodgers.
Look,
And I think
I think
there's so much like Ohtani, oh, how great! What it's just so great for baseball that he's with the Dodgers. Oh, this is amazing! What a great story! Like, I hope if the World Series champs who are going to be after Max Fried and Corbin Burns and Blake Snell and all these guys get the best pitching prospects in Steven Strasburg. I hope that some of these national guys would be like, all right, this is maybe a little too much.
Again, I think that there's no question Roki Sasaki coming to San Diego, being a member of the Padres would be an incredibly exciting development, not just from the fanfare perspective, but it tightens things even more in the NL West. We've seen how neck and neck the Padres and Dodgers have been. That would just narrow the gap even more. And now you're talking about next year going in with a rotation of Darvish, Cease, Sasaki, and King as your top 4. I mean, you're in as good a shape as anyone in baseball to, go deep into the postseason with that. So there's no question if he were to come to San Diego, it changes the trajectory of the Padres next year and realistically more likely for the long term. I mean, and a talent like this is someone who can do that, who can change the trajectory of your franchise. And the Padres are already on a really good trajectory, but he would just make it even that much, he would make their future just even that much brighter.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, we spent a lot of time on Roki. Let's hit you with a few other topics before we let you go. It is grainy Arizona Fall League highlight season. We had one today, Ethan Salas, opposite field home run. Just looking at the numbers, for the highlights from Leo De Vries that we've seen, the numbers are what they are. And we're coming off a year where there was so much excitement about who was it, Jacob Marcy in the Arizona Fall League. And you were among the people that were like, all right, guys, let's take it easy a little bit.
Yeah.
What, if anything, do we pay any attention to Ethan Salas and Leo De Vries in the Arizona Fall League? And what do we make of that? And particularly with Ethan Salas, like we look at 2025 as like maybe the year, maybe late in the year? Like, how do we view all this?
Yeah, so you view it with, hey, this is positive to see very, very young players. Let's not forget, Ethan Salas is still 18 years old, holding their own in the Arizona Fall League against better competition, an older, more mature competition. One thing to always be aware of is the pitching in the Arizona Fall League is bad. So you always need to modify your expectations with big offensive numbers there. But anytime you have someone who is this young and is coming off as rough a season as he has, and he's performing as well as he has, again, against older, more mature competition, it's a really good sign. I wouldn't see it and go, oh my God, he's back. He's going to be a superstar. He's going to be our starting catcher next year. None of that. But it's just a sign of progress. One of the things with Ethan Salas and talking to some officials in the Padres organization over the course of the year was his posture got messed up and his timing was really, really off in his swing. And it wasn't a matter of fatigue. It wasn't a matter of, the Midwest League cold. He got into a bad posture and his timing was off. And we saw it get a little bit better at the end of the year. Around the trade deadline, you started seeing him be on time for more pitches and just having better, more competitive at bats. And he ends up having a pretty good August. So we finished strong. And then now seeing him continue that in the fall league, it's positive. So I think if you put it in the context of the trajectory of he wasn't right for half the year, he made some adjustments, started to get back on track, and now is continuing that. You certainly see it in a positive light that way. In terms of his readiness, I would remind people he's 18 years old. Catching the big leagues is an enormous physical grind. He still has a lot of physical development ahead of him. Catchers need to move slowly. You can't magically just, put on 20, 30 pounds of muscle in an off season. It happens with natural physical maturity. And, he rushing him would not do him good or the Padres good until he's physically ready to handle that workload. And let's not forget, he was in high A last year and hit barely 200. You still need to send him out to Double A next year, give him time, let him work through all the adjustments he needs to. And the other thing is, he only caught, I believe it was 63 games last year. It's not like you can just all of a sudden, go to the big leagues and catch 110 games. Like, there's a progression here that needs to happen. So I would say just let him continue to grow. He's a young kid. Let him continue to develop. Putting expectations on him like, he'll be in the big leagues before he turns 19 next year. It's just not good for him or the franchise.
If the Padres can only devote money to Profar and Kim, who do they invest in, and what do you see as kind of a cap for those guys? Like, I would pay this much for if it's Profar. Profar seems to be the one that's maybe more realistic.
Yeah.
But it's a question of like, okay, a guy when his track record is this and just had this year at this stage in his career, like how comfortable are you giving him $15 million a year?
Yeah. So Jackson Profar, look, the X factor he is for the Padres can't be ignored. The energy he brings, the positivity in the clubhouse. He just fits really, really well in this clubhouse, in this city with this team. His production this year was obviously fantastic. We have seen, generally speaking, teams don't typically give out a lot of money to corner outfielders over the age of 30. It's just a profile that the game doesn't value very much right now, no matter how productive they are. So we'll see what Jackson Profar's market ends up being. But I do think if I'm the Padres, yeah, if you can bring him back, 3 years, 45 mil, I do it. I wonder if they'll even have to pay that much, just because, again, teams don't value these corner outfielders a lot. I mean, Teoscar Hernandez got 1 year, 23 mil last year. And I think just given Teoscar's profile and past track record, teams probably would have been more willing to give him more money than they might be willing to give Jackson Profar. So I'm going to be really fascinated to see what his market is. But yeah, if you can bring him back, call it 2 years, 30 million, 3 years, 45. I think you certainly consider it. And I think it would make sense, especially given the Padres' needs, just positionally, have their roster construction. They don't have a ton of outfield options. That's where they need it. Kim's a trickier case. Shortstops and his defense are going to be valued very highly on the market, and he's probably going to get a significant amount of money just for his defensive ability alone. coming off of, major shoulder injury and questions around his bat after how much of a step back he took last year. And given the Padres collection of middle infielders, again, acknowledging none of them are as good defensively at shortstop as Ha-seong Kim is, but just you look at the roster, what they need, how they're constructed, bringing Profar back for less money than it would probably cost to bring Kim back probably is the decision that makes the most sense for the franchise.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Is there a free agent on the market that you think, oh, that guy would look good in the Padres uniform?
Huh. You're gonna laugh. I've been so deep in Sasaki stuff.
That's all
I
right.
haven't. Yeah, I mean,
We started kind of exploring this last episode, and I don't know if there's one in particular that this offseason feels like a great fit. So if you don't have a great answer, I'm
yeah.
not going to blame you.
Let me look through it real quick. Yeah, I mean,
Well, I'm trying to think of who came up. Tyler O'Neill, Jock Peterson, Christian Walker. There's obviously some pitchers out there I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
yeah, the first base thing is tricky because Luis Arias needs to be in the lineup every day. Putting him at second base probably isn't great. So you're looking at Arias at first, Cronenworth at second, Bogarts at short right now, which we'll see. But look, Tyler O'Neill is definitely someone that could be a good addition. The center field market's not great. Yeah, Jock Peterson is certainly interesting. I think that the left-handed bat, the experience in the NL West, a DH is definitely something that could be valuable. Mix him in as well. So, yeah, I would tend to agree with those. There's a part of me that wonders if Eloy Jimenez is a buy low candidate. He's had some injuries, he's really struggled, but if he were to come in and just be able to be a DH only, put him in a situation with a lot of other players that we've seen Latin American players in particular flourish in San Diego. The organization is very, very Latin American player friendly. That's actually one that intrigues me a little bit. It's just a buy low.
And I think it would Yohan Moncada kind of sit in that category as well.
Probably less so for me. I mean, I think you look at it. Yeah, I think how should I say this? There are some effort and dedication issues that have been persistent throughout his career, including when he was a prospect, that I don't know if it makes him the best addition and the best bet to unlock a significant amount of value out of.
Who do you extend first of Luis Arias, Dylan Cease, Michael King? Those guys seem like, hey, going into 2025, this is it. Who do you prioritize from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think you prioritize Dylan Cease. I mean, just what he's done, the ability to pitch the front of rotation, eat innings, electric stuff. He's option A. And then I think you look at Michael King as option B simply because finding starting pitching, quality starting pitching is just so hard. Quality, durable starting pitching. And Michael King, what he did last year was absolutely fantastic. And I think that you certainly look to lock him up second. I think Luis Arias is a standout player. It's kind of funny to me that people that debate his value. He's absolutely someone that, you put on a winning ball club and is going to do great things for you and be an impact player, even if it's not reflected in WAR. At the same time, just given how hard it is to find durable, consistent, impactful starting pitching, I think you have to start there. And I would start with Dylan Cease.
Is there, I believe it's Monday. Any chance Jackson Merrill takes Rookie of the Year on Monday?
Probably not. And it was interesting. I went on MLB Network's High Heat in August. And at that point, I thought Merrill actually had pulled ahead of Paul Skeens. And in my
He
mind,
did, according to Vegas at one point.
Yeah. And then Paul Skeens just went absolutely bananas at the end of the year. I think realistically, it's probably going to go to Skeens. Again, Jackson Merrill had an unbelievable season, like truly remarkable. Just, I think we need to not discount how insanely impressive it is for a guy who had played 46 games above the Class A levels, had never played center field professionally, to come up, be a really good defensive center fielder, learning a new position while also making the adjustment offensively. He didn't hit under 260 all year after April 6th. I mean, the consistency was remarkable. We saw the power come. We saw him come up in the biggest moments and be not just a complementary piece in the Padres lineup, but a foundational piece. I mentioned, early in the season, Tatis hurt, Bogart's hurt, Kim not producing, Machado off to the slowest start of his career. Jackson Merrill and Dirksen Profar kept this lineup afloat. And for Merrill to do that as a rookie after barely playing Double-A, it's insane. So I think, we need to appreciate Jackson Merrill had just an unbelievable season. That said, Paul Skeens had a historic season. 11-3, 1.96 ERA, 170 punch outs, 32 walks. And we saw the adjustment. There was a point where he had a 3 or 4 start stretch after his amazing debut where he had an ERA up around 4. And I remember thinking, okay, the adjustment's happening. Maybe the league, again, not there's anything wrong with him. It's just, the league, makes adjustments and you have to adjust back. And I thought, okay, maybe it's going to start here. And then he allowed 2 runs all of September. So again, I do think it is going to go to Paul Skeens. I don't think anyone is foolish or out of their minds or dumb or any negative word for voting really in either direction. But I do think realistically it will go to Paul Skeens. The way he finished the year, I think really just put him over the top.
I'm curious to see how the vote breaks down. As almost as much as, obviously I'm more curious to see who, how the final tally adds up, but just how much consideration Jackson Merrill ends up getting. Because like you said, he certainly deserves it. Paul Skeens did a lot, didn't pitch one significant inning the entire season, but it's a different conversation.
And again, look, there is something to be said for playing from opening day through the end of the season on both sides of the ball for a competitive team and propping up a competitive team for the first half and then staying strong through the second half and leading them to some really, really big wins with enormous hits, those, home runs in the 8th inning or later. There's a lot to be said for that. And again, I think it's perfectly valid for someone to vote for Jackson Merrill. Just knowing and understanding the wins of, I'm going to say wins with a D at the end. Not,
I got you.
I just do think it will be Skeens.
Yeah. Wins above replacement.
Just the wins of the industry, I should say.
Yeah. It wouldn't be surprised. There's a great case to be made for Jackson, but it just feels like it's Paul, he opened the window in August, a 3.18 ERA, got everybody's hopes up, and then tighten things up in September, like you mentioned. So, good on him for doing that. Kyle, you're the best. I appreciate it, as always, but certainly on short notice. Always great getting a chance to catch up with you, and I'm sure you'll be getting a text from me again in the not too distant future. So I always appreciate you responding.
Awesome. Anytime, Darnay.
Thank you.